So in the latest report from the OECD, Pensions at a Glance 2021, which runs to approximately 224 pages, they highlighted the personal pension contribution level, which is required as a minimum in the UK, which is 8%. Because there's a number of other countries out there where the minimum amount, or the mandatory amount, is higher than that at 10%. So I just wanted to run some scenarios as far as that 8% level of contribution. We'll start at various ages, and we'll look at the potential pot that could get to, the potential total pension pot that 8% contribution could get to for an individual, and have a think about the various factors that are involved. Now, as a reminder, that minimum level of pension contribution went up from April 2019 from 5% to 8%, and that's for anyone that's employed. They get auto-enrolled into a pension scheme if they're 22 and over, earning £10,000 plus, and up to state pension age, they get auto-enrolled into a pension scheme and they get that minimum level of pension contribution. 5% of that has to come from the employee, and 3% of that comes from the employer. Now, there are two things really to mention here. There are lots of employers out there that pay more than that minimum level of contribution. So in some cases, the employer could pay all of that contribution. That's the first thing. The second thing is that actually the minimum level of pension contribution is based on qualifying earnings, which is a little bit confusing and a bit unusual in the sense that 8% is actually based on a band of earnings between £6,240 and £50,270. So as an example, if we take a salary of £30,000, the pension contribution, the 8% minimum, the 8% is based on qualifying earnings. So it's based on the earnings from £6,240 to £30,000 in the case of someone earning £30,000. It isn't based on the full £30,000. So if we had that 8% and it was based on £30,000, then it would be about £2,400 per year. Now, in the case of qualifying earnings, because it goes from £6,240 to £30,000, it's the 8% based on that amount. So that in effect would be about £1,900 per year. So that's the pension contribution being paid in on behalf of the individual, that's made up of employer and employee pension contributions. Obviously, if we take that £1,900 and we divide it by our salary of £30,000, it actually works out about 6% pension contribution based on that gross salary. So that's something to be very mindful of when you're looking at the minimum contribution basis. And if your contributions are based on qualifying earnings, then it won't be based on your entire gross salary. Now, this is even worse for somebody that's on lower earnings. So if we take the example of somebody on £15,000 per year, then in effect their gross pension contribution that would be going into their pension would actually be 4% if you use that 8% of qualifying earnings. I hope that's relatively clear, but obviously let me know in the comments down below. But that's just something to be mindful of when you're looking at pension contributions, because sometimes people look at it and go, well, hang on, this doesn't seem to be 8% of my gross pay. In some cases, it's because it's based on qualifying earnings and not their entire basic gross pay. Now, that is something that the government is looking into, and hopefully they just get rid of that basis completely, and the minimum basis for pension contributions goes to the entire gross basic pay and not qualifying earnings. So I just want to take a super simple example with this. This is our cash flow plan. We're going to take our old friend Mr. Pickles, and we're going to make the assumption that he's on £26,000 basic pay, his basic salary, and we're going to do 8% of that as his gross salary. So we're not doing this on qualifying earnings. So we're going to have the full 8% of his salary is getting paid into a pension. We've got 2.5% inflation rate, and we're going to run this up to his state pension age of age 68. Obviously, £26,000 as a contribution into his personal pension. If it's 8% of £26,000, it's about £173 per month. That's about £2,080 per year. We can have a look at what that eventually accumulates. So we've got a very simple linear model, 5.5% growth rate, which is broadly in line with where Vanguard sees the expected returns on a 60-40 balanced portfolio. So that's also something worth bearing in mind, is that a number of people, when they are auto-enrolled in pension schemes, will likely go into the default fund option, which may or may not be right for their the level of risk that they'll be looking to take, but it will be a standard default fund, which is typically around the balanced level of risk. Definitely something worth having a look at when you're looking at this. So we've got 5.5% growth rate, 2.5% inflation. Obviously, that's a 3% real rate of return for Mr. Pickles. And so we obviously can see that money building up over the years. He's paying in $2,080 per year, which was also adjusted for inflation, so it's increasing. So we're really trying to build some degree of inflation into this pot. So this is a real rate of return on here. So we get to about £200,000 at age 68. Now, if we assume that he's just going to draw down on that money, he's going to use the tax-free cash for his income. He's not using it as a lump sum to pay off the mortgage or for any other reason that he might have, holidays, etc. He's just going to draw down on that entire $200,000 in using, let's say, its phased drawdown over the years from age 68. So £200,000 if he's contributing 8% per year of his salary, £26,000 starting point. Now, age 68, obviously, he gets his state pension, $9,627 a year. So Mr. Pickles is wanting to get to about £20,800 per year, which is the moderate standard of living according to the PLSA's research. And to do that, he's obviously got his state pension, £9,627 per year, which gets paid to him from age 68. He's then going to top that up with his personal pension, which he's going to put into effectively phased drawdown. So some of this money will be tax-free cash and some of it will be taxable. So in effect, I guess we're not taking tax into account here, but it would be about £18,000, £19,000 a year after tax for Mr. Pickles. But just to really give you an idea as to what impact that has on his pension pot. So obviously he's drawing down on that. Now, that $11,173 per year is about 5.5% of his starting fund value of £200,000. Obviously, if we have got a real rate return of 3% and we're taking 5.5% out per year, then clearly that's going to have a downward pressure on the capital value of that pot over time, which isn't in itself an issue as long as it lasts Mr. Pickles for the rest of his life. Clearly, it runs out around age 94 on this very basis. So if we just consider what are the factors that Mr. Pickles can control in terms of the eventual level or pot of money that he gets to at his retirement, clearly he can change the underlying investment. So a number of workplace pensions will have a default fund option which everyone will initially go into. Now that can be changed. So for example, Mr. Pickles could potentially be taking greater risk in those earlier years. We've assumed for this model that he's got a 60-40 portfolio, which hasn't changed at all for his entire lifetime. The other factor is that he could pay in a greater amount of money. So let's make an assumption here that rather than just doing 8%, he ups that to a pension contribution of 10%, which would be about £216 per month. If we have a look at that and what impact that has, it takes his eventual pension pot up to 254,000. So it would be approximately 20-odd thousand that he would have contributed in more, and he would have ended up with a pension pot which has 50-odd £1,000 more in it. So when we factor that in, we can see that actually over that time period, we're a little bit more confident that he's not going to run out of money during his retirement based on these assumptions. So if we amend this to a situation where somebody starts 10 years later, so let's say from age 32, they're doing 8% of their gross pay, of their gross basic pay into pension. So it works about £173 per month going in from 32. And we can see the significant difference that then obviously makes to their eventual pension pot. So age 68, we've got 135,000 now versus 200,000 for the individual that started from age 22. Now the key takeaway from here is that looking at then at that level of income, the same level of income being taken out on the same basis, then clearly there is a fundamental issue in terms of it running out significantly earlier from age 83 than it did for the individual that started contributing earlier. So that's just that difference of starting far earlier in terms of those contributions going in from age 22 versus age 32. So clearly for someone at age 32, if on the same basis they're looking to take this kind of level of income out, then quite clearly 8% is going to be insufficient as a level of contribution going into the pension plan to be able to get to a similar pot of money if they're looking to get to around 200 or 250,000 pounds from age 68, or they're going to need a far higher level of investment return than in this case here at 5.5%. However, if we amend that contribution to around £290 per month, which is about 13% of the 26,000, gets us back up to just over 200,000, 226,000 at age 68. So that's a 13% contribution. So it's not huge differences here in terms of levels of percentage. Obviously, the further out, the bigger the difference makes in terms of growth. The closer we are to our retirements, the bigger the impact of our contributions make. But clearly for this individual starting at age 32, we need to be paying in a higher level of contribution than the minimum amount of 8%. So in this case, it's about 13% for this individual.